Hi, everybody. This is Kathy L. Murphy, the Pulpwood Queen, reporting live from my little cabin in the woods, Murphy's Law here in East Texas. And we are now with another publisher. We've got the director, Kim Davis of Madville Publishing, and she's going to present some of her authors. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Kim. And we've got one author that's having a little bit of internet it's not her fault that we can't see her face, but we will just
It probably is my fault, but
we'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Kim.
Okay. Hi, I'm Kim Davis. I'm the founder and director of Madville Publishing. We are a nonprofit independent press based in Denton, Texas. We started in 2018 and first attended Girlfriend Weekend in 2019 at the insistence of Johnny Bernhard. We love Johnny Bernhard. And actually, I had the pleasure of working with Johnny at Texas Review Press, where I published her first two books as editor and publisher. The panel is not about me, though, and it's not really about the press, although we are so proud of these three women that we're introducing. Our press is growing faster than we expected because we're getting such fabulous work. So today we've got from 2021, all three from summer 2021, Lee Zacharias, who's going to talk to us about her novel, What a Wonderful World This Could Be. We've got Wondra Chang, who's going to speak to us about her novel, Sanju, and Francine Rodriguez, who's going to speak to us about her short story collection, A Woman's Story. So I'm going to introduce Lee first. I'm moving relatively quickly because we got three of them. Lee was brought into the Madville family as a co-editor on an anthology we did called Runaway by another one of our wonderful benefactors, Lou Ann Smith, who's now working on the third anthology. We first met Lee at AWP in 2019, and then in 2021 published this novel, What a Wonderful World This Could Be. I was going to read the cover blurb, but I'm not going to do that. I'd rather let Lee talk. She can tell us about the story. This book has won this recently. It's just been named a distinguished favorite with the NYC Big Book Awards, and it was a finalist in the American Fiction Awards for 2021. So Lee, I'm not going to read all that stuff. Just you come on and tell us about you in this book, please, ma'am, and do a little reading.
Okay. Initially, Kim was going to ask me to tell a little bit about the publishing history of this book, which is such a long story, but here it is. It's finally out. I actually began this novel in the 1980s. Shortly after Kathy Wilkerson, one of the two women who survived the Greenwich Village townhouse bombing, an accidental bombing by the radical group Weatherman in 1970, turned herself in 10 years later. And I think my story is kind of a familiar woman's story. It took me too long to finish this book, which would have been my second novel if it had been published in the order in which my books were written. I was teaching full-time, directing a university writing program, editing a literary review, and I had a baby. So I didn't finish a draft of this novel to send out until 1990. And some of you may be old enough to remember that there was an incredible media blitz of coverage of the 1960s in 1988 and 1989, sort of a la the Beatles. It was 20 years ago today. So in the early 90s, trying to sell this book was sort of like trying to sell last year's pet rock. It came close. It was even accepted at a couple of major New York houses. But before we could finish the contracts, the editors would get fired. It was a time of tremendous upheaval in publishing. And over the next decades, it did a lot of shelf warming. Every now and then, a new agent or new editor would get interested. I'd take it out, dust it off, revive it some more. And ultimately, it would come to Nothing until I met Kim. So briefly, it is the story of a woman named Alex who has grown up a totally neglected and unloved child. And she falls in love when she's 18 years old. She meets and falls in love with a charismatic white civil rights worker who is on his way to Mississippi for the summer of 1964 to register Black voters, the same summer when the 3 civil rights workers were murdered. And in a way, falling in love with him is a way for her to get outside herself and to begin to engage with the troubles of the world instead of just her own troubled past. And what I'm going to read, with many thanks to Kim and thank you to Mandy, Kathy, and the Pulpwood Queens for hosting this wonderful conference, is from the year 1969. The collective, the political collective that Alex and her husband Ted have founded has just been taken over by the radical group Weatherman, and they want no part of that. But on the day that they're supposed to find a new place to live, Alex wakes up with the stomach flu. And while she's busy being sick, her husband gets arrested. He keeps being arrested. He's a prominent anti-war leader by this time, and the police harassing him. And so I'm picking up right after Alex and the lawyer who serves as a kind of leftist lawyer for the whole collective have picked Ted up at the police station, and on their way home, they're going to stop to get something to eat. Again, it's 1969. Sammy's okay. Sandy slowed down for a parking place. Sealed inside the air-conditioned Mercedes, Alex felt as if she were inside a hermetic bubble. It took her a full minute to pick out the reflection of the flashing blue lights. What the hell do they want? Sandy pulled over and reached for his wallet. The cop thrust his face down, ignoring the license and registration Sandy offered. I'd like to talk to your passenger. Sandy folded his wallet. I'm an attorney at law, and my passenger is my client who has just been detained for several hours. Get out of the car. Ted opened the passenger door. Don't you guys ever get tired of me? The officer stepped back without seeming to have heard, and Sandy opened his door. Alex scrambled after Ted. My client is free on bond. Unless you have a warrant for his arrest on an unrelated charge, you can't legally detain him for at least 24 hours. The officer took at Ted's elbow. As Alex opened her mouth, Sandy shook his head. A knot of kids had gathered on the sidewalk. Inside Baskin-Robbins, people were pressing their faces to the glass. Ted stared straight ahead as he was escorted to the car. Clear this sidewalk, the officer ordered. Pig. The crowd swelled. Near the entrance to the ice cream shop, a dog was licking the pavement. The officer stared coldly at Sandy. Tell your clients to disperse. My client is in your car. Move back, the officer commanded again. Clear this sidewalk now. Sandy inclined his head toward Alex. Take my car. Don't worry, this is illegal. I'll have him out in an hour. He reached into his pocket for the keys. It happened so quickly, Alex missed it. There was a gasp from the crowd, and Officer Church was holding his gun. Take your hand out of your pocket slowly and bend over the car. Anything you say, sir, Sandy muttered. A rock shattered the Baskin-Robbins window, showering the sidewalk with glass and sending the crowd screaming. Yelping, the dog shot down the street. The officer spoke into his radio, and within seconds, another squad car screeched around the corner. Alex stood paralyzed while the other cops pursued the fleeing crowd. By the time the squad cars drove off, only Alex and the cursing manager of Baskin-Robbins remained on the street. She bent to pick up Sandy's keys from the gutter. At the station, she was told they'd been charging with attempting to incite a riot. Bail would not be set until morning. It was after midnight when she got home, and the collective was assembled in the living room. Their voices carried up the stairs. Matt's commitment to the revolution was weak. When the rank and file had called for the ousting of certain members of the steering committee, he had been silent. He had balked at giving up his dogs. Alex had caught a glimpse of him as she came through the hall, sitting in a straight-back chair, eyes on the floor. Tell him to buzz off, she willed him from upstairs, but the litany droned on. In the morning, Alex called the courthouse, but the hearing wasn't scheduled until 10:30. She drove to the Register. That's the newspaper that she works for as a darkroom technician, by the way. At 10, Irv strolled in. Get your Big Irv's going to take you out today and show you how it's done. Full page spread. Beating the Heat. Photographs by Irv Stone and Alex Neal. How's that grab you? As a matter of fact, I was just on my way out. She picked up her bag. Beating the Heat? So it's not Life magazine. Little girlo's got to start somewhere. Irv hoisted himself to the darkroom counter. Didn't know you were working part-time these days. Opportunity only knocks once, you know. Look, I don't mean to be a snob, all right? I have another time. I have personal business. Hey, he jumped from his perch to follow her through the newsroom. Where are you going? To the courthouse. In the parking lot, he watched her dig in the bag for the keys and then inserted himself between her and the door of the Mercedes. Nice car. It belongs to a friend. Irv whistled. My husband's lawyer, if you have to know. Impatiently, she applied the keys. His leer curved into an insinuating grin. You and hubby having trouble? Tell Big Irv. She glared at him and he moved aside, but held the door once she was settled in the car. Look, I have to go, she said, hands on the wheel. I'm just trying to be a nice guy, he protested. Well, you have no talent for it. She sighed. Go to the pool, Irv. Go find yourself a lemonade stand. I have to be at the courthouse. There's no story at the courthouse. Today's story's at the jail. She turned so sharply, she nearly bumped his head, thrust down inside the car. Gotcha. He closed the door and backed away, but she rolled the window down. Well, you work at a newspaper, he said. In the darkroom, by herself. What story? He squatted beside the car. Is your husband in jail, Alex? Yes. Better slide over and let me drive. The smirk was gone. Some guy in a holding cell hung himself this morning. That's it.
Thank you, Lee. Woo!
Thank you.
Yeah. We need to move right along so we don't run out of time here. So let me introduce Wandra Chang. It was a great summer last year for fiction at Madville Publishing, with Lee's book coming out in June. Then we had Wandra's book right after it in July. I met Wandra. Her book is called Sanju, by the way. I met Wandra, first of all, also in 2019 at the Gemini Inc. conference that summer in San Antonio, where Wondra lives. That's a great group. If you're in Texas, you might want to look into joining Gemini Inc. They promote literacy in their area and do a wonderful job. Wandra told me she had a manuscript, and we talked about it a lot because she was volunteering for Gemini Inc. while we were having a booth in the book fair. So I'm not going to go much into that because I know Wondra is probably going to tell us about it herself. So I'm going to leave that for her introduction. And without further ado, Wondra, would you please join us?
Yeah, thank you, Kim. And thank you all for being here. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Mandy, for providing this space. I met Kim at a conference, writers conference. And I make a point of being present, and that's how I operate. And so I was there, even though I paid for the full conference, I volunteered to help. And it was great because I got to meet Kim and we talked a while. And, I was thinking, what a nice lady. She's very easy to talk to, very easy to talk to. We talked a while. And so I told her briefly about my manuscript. And then it was the following year and AWP was held in San Antonio. Of course, that was the beginning of COVID, so about half the people didn't show up. And Kim was there, I was her contact, so I got to meet other authors. The authors, before I submitted my manuscript, I did research. I don't jump into things. I did a lot of research, and there are some really great authors there, high caliber.
Just heard one of them reading.
So anyway, when I was ready, I emailed Kim and I said, okay, I'm sending it. And I just clicked and sent the attachment without query letter or anything. I figured, well, she knows me. So anyway, she said, she replied in a few days and she said, wow, I read it right through and do you want to write a contract? That's how it happened with me. And that's very rare, as you know, in the book industry.
Well, it's rare for me. I don't do that for just anybody either.
Right. So anyway, I've been thinking lately, usually I do a lot of, I attend a lot of book club meetings. They choose to read my book. And so they always ask about my background. They seem to be more interested in the author because they have read the book already and history of Korea and such. And I was thinking the other day and said, actually, I was a published author.
This is what it looks like too.
Yeah. I was a published author at age 10. Not a book, but I went to a competition, province-wide competition, and I won the first place. So it was printed in the province-wide newspaper. Anyway, it's very hard to write in a second language. So, but when I decided to write this, I knew it will take a lot more effort than other people, and I was willing to do that. So I consult Google a lot. For example, the verb and adverbs that go together make a different meaning, and you can add a lot of different adverbs and the meaning changes, and I have to consult that. I still do sometimes. So anyway, I wrote Sunju. The background is that of my reason for writing it. When I started writing it, it was a time before K-pop and K-drama. So people didn't really know about Korea that much. I wanted to introduce Korea, not just, about Korean War, but it's people's psychology, how people feel, and also the flavor and taste, the feel you get from the scenery and the smell and all of that. So I wanted to introduce Korea as much as I could, and the customs and so forth. So this story begins in Seoul, capital city of Korea, in 1946. So here it goes. At the sight of the two tall Americans in military uniforms walking ahead of her toward the Korean Central Administration building, Sonju's heart beat a little faster. A month after America dropped atomic bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, one of her Japanese classmates invited her house to say goodbye, and they had cried together. That was well over a year ago. Sonju took another glance at the broad backs of the Americans before she turned left to cross the cobblestone boulevard. She tightened her grip on the thinking stone in her gloved hand and hurried, swallowing the dry November air that scraped her throat, puffing white smoke with each breath. The 8th house from the corner, a newly whitewashed traditional house, Miss had told her. After a 4th knock, the varnished wooden gate opened halfway and a young maid's cocked head appeared. "I'm your mistress's friend," Sonja said. The maid opened the gate to let her in, and Sonja marched into the courtyard and on toward the living quarters. The maid dashed by Sonju, craned her neck toward the living room, and announced in an urgent tone, "You have a visitor, ma'am." Misu opened the frosted glass door and her face lit up like the first flower in spring. "Ah, it's you." She hooked her arm into Sonju's and walked toward the room, her long satin dress whispering with each step she took. In Misu's marriage room, everything was new and shiny. Freshly varnished paper floor, a double wardrobe against one wall, next to it neatly stacked floor pillows, and another wall, 3 works of blue and white porcelain pottery displayed on a low credenza. One of them cradled Mrs. Thinking Stone like a prize jewel. Sonju smiled and touched the stone in her pocket. Kongu, Misu, and Sonju each had picked a small flat stone at a church garden when they were still in elementary school and called them thinking stones. Sonju took off her coat and gloves. As she lowered herself to a floor pillow, she glanced at the embroidered flowers on Misu's pink skirt, then briefly dropped her gaze to her own gray wool dirndl skirt. "You are glowing, Misu. Marriage suits you well." Misu's small cherry lips turned up and her thin eyes twinkled. She quit smiling and studied Sonju's face. "Something's wrong. Tell me." After a slow sip of hot roasted barley tea, Sonju said, "This morning, my mother announced that my sister is promised in marriage. The wedding is in April. She said her daughters will not marry out of order." She ran her fingers over the pillow's piping until it turned the corner. "I'm not ready yet." "When will you be ready? You are almost 20. You are keeping track of my years too?" Sonju winced inwardly at her own shrill voice, and this time said in a softer tone, "I want to marry Kongu." Then she asked, "What do I do?" Mrs. brows jumped up. "Marry Kongu?" She sighed as if weary and said, "We should have stopped singing when we started middle school. There is a good reason why boys and girls are separated at that age." Sonju wanted to say something just as condescending, but said, "But we didn't. The three of us swore lifelong friendship on the thinking stones. I told you I wasn't going to quit my friendship with Kongu just because I reached the age of 12. You want me to stop?"
You've
How-
got a few more minutes. I wonder though, let's take I'd kind of like to explain that we move beyond this time with Sonju as a young woman, and this is the beginning of her troubles, where she has to confess to her mother. I want to jump ahead just a little bit because Sonju moves into the countryside and we don't see just Seoul. We see what the old South Korea looked like in the countryside on a rural, what do you call it? Do you call it a
farming
farm?
village?
Yeah,
Right.
farming village. And so I think that scenery also is really important to this story as well, this village and how it changes, because the country is changing. And what we're seeing, I think the key that we have to put in here as well is that women's position in that society is also changing, and we see it changing through the person of this character, Sonju.
Can I interject something?
Take over, please.
Yeah, in this convention, I try to attend every one of them. We didn't really talk about how the society and religion affects a person's decisions and person's life. And in Korea, 500 years ago, when the when the kingdom changed, dynasty changed, it adopted Confucian as a national religion. Before that, it was Buddhism. And under Buddhism, women were allowed to divorce and they were allowed to own property. Under Confucian religion, women were totally at the bottom of the rung and they had no rights. So it was a very oppressive society. And so I, wanted to kind of show the effects of that oppressive religious practice in the society. And also along the way, this person, I followed the main character for over 25 years. And over that time, she came out of age during the Japanese occupation. Japan occupied for 35 years, and we still have great animosity against Japan as a nation. And then after World War II, it was liberated and it became a republic. And then because it was dictatorship, there was a revolution. And I actually witnessed the revolution myself. And before that, there was Korean War, 4 years after, 5 years after at the end of World War II. So we went through, Korea as a nation has gone through a lot of change. And then after revolution, the year following, right after the revolution in 1960, there was a coup d'etat. And ever since then, the military junta took over. So when the book ends, she is still living under that. But however, the military two-star general who turned to president, he became a president, he set Korea on the course of industrialization. Before it was a farming country. So it started really progressing even under the very, very, very oppressive dictatorship. So I left Korea in 1971. So all my life, I lived in the dictatorial country. So this person, I followed until about 1969. But country has changed in many ways, but at the same time, it's like family, family changes over time, but they also at the same time stay the same. And that's how it happens. So I wanted the readers to think about women's lib. It has women's liberation tilt, because this person has a very singular purpose in her life, to have her own sense of self in that oppressive society, especially for women. So that's what this story is about. We follow, and she achieves that quietly.
Yeah, that's a nice way of saying it, Wondra. She achieves it quietly, although it covers a long period of time. She has to be quiet for a really long time for it to finally take place. And it'll make you cry. It's a wonderful, everybody here who read it before it was published cried. And we read until we got to the end. We didn't put it down and pick it back up. We just opened it and read and cried. So it's a really good novel. We need to move on, or dear Francine isn't going to have a chance. So Wandra, thank you so much. Maybe we've got a minute for questions at the end. Let's move along to Francine Rodriguez, who looks like a white square on
Hi, the invisible woman. Just use your imagination. Okay, so I'll try to move this along for everybody. A Woman's Story is an anthology of short stories about overlooked Latinas living in Los Angeles. They're varying ages and live varying lifestyles. They represent a wide range of women: a formerly incarcerated gang member, a high school teacher, an emergency room nurse in the time of COVID, a returning soldier from Afghanistan, a domestic worker, a woman living an alternative lifestyle, an elderly woman waiting to die quietly, a politician's wife, and a young mother living on the edge of poverty. These stories are of real women's lives that were told to me when I worked in the fields of law and psychology. When I started writing them, I got a lot of back push from people I showed the stories to friends of mine. I would say beta readers. I wanted them to be beta readers. They were not happy. They said these stories are too dark, they're too edgy. And then most of them being Latinx, like myself, they said, hey, nobody wants to read about Mexicans. Mexicans don't read. You're never going to be able to get this book out there. But I kept going. I kept writing the stories. I finished them. I started sending them out to journals. They started getting picked up. In fact, one was picked up in Madville's Taboo and Transgressions. And later on, that story was added to the rest of the stories that came out in A Woman's Story. What is important about these stories, besides that, is that they tell of racism, exploitation, violence, inner rage, love, sexism, and relationships with children and family. The women in these stories are often at the center of a collision in their culture, their community, their sexuality, and gender. And I have to thank him for moving ahead and publishing this book, because at the time I never would have imagined this summer A Woman's Story was the winner for the International Latino Book Awards. And so I was really humbled to have my book out there with, I don't know, thousands, it seemed, of entries. So I believe the stories had to be told for a purpose. The women in these stories speak to isolation, confusion, and bitterness. They deal with struggles that are pushed to the extreme and in continuing impact of trauma every day in their life. But these women sustain and survive. The stories are gentle and painful at the same time. Most importantly, they let us have a look at the world through someone else's eyes. And these are the stories we tell each other. The story people always wanted me to read the most when I did presentations was Smiley and Laughing Girl. And Smiley is a formerly incarcerated gang member. She's now in her 30s. She's out raising 3 children, one of whom is her daughter, Laughing Girl, who she had while she was incarcerated in prison. I'm going to start a little before all this happens, and how she ended up where she ended up. And if I'm running too long, just let me know and I'll stop. Okay, Kim? So here we are. Then I had some bad luck when I was 7 months pregnant with my big stomach popping out over the top of my sweatpants. I sold some smack to an underage girl and her friends outside her middle school. She ended up overdosing because it wasn't cut enough, and her friends were able to identify me to the cops. Everybody remembers a pregnant drug dealer with stringy hair and dirty clothes, even a bunch of 14-year-olds high out of their minds. But before they even picked me up, I sold some coke to an undercover cop. I would have sworn he was a dirty street biker, but I was wrong. So there you go. I got sent up again. My surrender date was 5 days after Laughing Girl was born. I called her Laughing Girl because she came out smiling and smiled up at me the whole time until they took her away. On the day after she was born, a woman came to my room and said she was from Child Services. She let me hold my baby one last time before she took her. She told me Laughing Girl was going into foster care. I cried nonstop the next few days, up until I checked into CIW for my second round. I knew better than to go in looking like a weak sister. By the time I got out on parole, Laughing Girl didn't even know me. I heard her foster mother cried because she was praying I'd never get out and try to take her back. Laughing Girl cried too. She wanted her foster mom, and I wasn't her. I guess we all cried together. When I got out, I figured I'd spent enough time in my life paying for my stupid mistakes. I stopped hanging out with anybody from 18th Street or the Avenues. I moved back with my mother, and I'm still there. We get along better now. She doesn't drink as much because she has bleeding ulcers. So here I am, a few more bad relationships and 2 more kids to raise by myself. And Laughing Girl looks like she wants to follow in my footsteps. I didn't cry much at Chavo's funeral, even though tears were falling around me to make up for the ones I didn't have. I just closed my eyes and remembered everything that happened between us, our own story. It didn't hurt so much anymore. So much time had passed. I didn't even hate him. After the funeral, I went back to the house. Tonight my mother will go out drinking with her friends and I'll be alone with my 2 boys, unless I can get Laughing Girl to stay in with me. Lately, all she talks about is this guy from 18th Street. His name's Armando. I heard he has 2 strikes, and he's only been out for 2 months. She thinks she's in love with him. Later, after my mother went out, I put the boys to bed. I settled down in front of the TV. Laughing Girl finally came home. She pushed the door open and staggered inside. It was almost 10 o'clock. I could see she was drunk, or high, by the way she moved. Before I even got a good look at her eyes, giggling and holding onto the walls, she started toward the bedroom she shared with her brothers. I yelled after her, "Don't make any noise, they're sleeping. Why don't you come in here for a little while?" "I gotta get ready," she slurred. "Ready why?" "Going out riding," she answered. "Mondo's picking me up." I got up and walked toward her. Even a few feet away, I picked up the heavy smell of alcohol and something stronger and more bitter, like the stuff they use to mix paint. No, I thought, she doesn't do that anymore. I saw her a few years back, still in elementary school, sitting by the train tracks with her cholo friends, sniffing something they poured into a sock. I stared at her wide, glassy eyes that moved side to side and didn't see anything. Her hair was matted and tangled, stiff and crunchy from all the mousse she poured on it. Her eyeliner was smeared, and most of her pencil eyebrows had worn off. I followed her to the bedroom, where she fell against the wall, trying to find the light switch. Muttering to herself, she stepped out of her tight black jeans and low-cut blouse that didn't even manage to cover her stomach, and pulled out a dresser drawer. The drawer stuck, and she fell back on her butt, ending up on the floor, swearing. The noise woke up my son sleeping in a single bed. My younger one pulled the quilt over his head, trying to shut out the light and the noise. I focused my eyes on the glare coming from the single bulb in the center of the ceiling. There was a fresh tattoo on her neck. I hadn't seen it the last time. I recognized the sign right away. And something else, a hickey, large and red, covering the space under her jawline. The hickey looked fresh. She hadn't been home in a couple of days. "Where have you been?" Shavo's death and the funeral had kept me busy the last few days. I hadn't seen her. But then I couldn't kid myself. She didn't come home some nights anyway. "Answer me, where have you been at night?" Laughing Girl zipped up another pair of jeans and gave me a dirty look. "I told you before, I'm with my friends." "You're staying with that Mondo, aren't you? He's too old for you. He's just going to get you in trouble." She glared at me. "You don't know him. He loves me." "He doesn't love you. He's just using you because you're stupid." Laughing Girl whirled around and picked up her hand, bringing it toward my face. I stepped back, surprised. She dropped her hand. "Leave me alone, okay? I hate it here, you and those damn dirty brats." She brought her hands to her sides and walked back to the living room. "I need some money." "You're supposed to give me money. That's what you get your welfare for." "I don't have any money. I can barely pay the rent," I told her. "You can get yourself a job." "Fuck no," she yelled. "I'm so glad I have Mondo. He said he'll give me anything I need not to come back here. Tomorrow I'm taking my stuff and I'm moving in with him." "Well, you go ahead and do it," I yelled back. "I'll report him to the cops. You're underage, and I'll call them on you, too. You better not call anybody. Mondo's friends will come after you and your other damn kids. Grandma, too." We stood there looking at each other. "Don't go out. Just stay here," I heard my voice begging her. "You can't make me stay. I hate it here. I hate you." She slammed the door as hard as she could, making the walls shake, and then it was silent, except for the low hum of the TV. I sat down on the couch and stared at the wall. There would probably be quite a few Mondos in her life before she figured it out, if she ever did. But right now there was only this one, and I wanted him gone. I'd seen the car he drove, and I knew more or less where he stayed, but all that could be figured out later. I still knew a few homeboys from 18th Street, and even a couple from the avenues. It was smart not to let go of your connections, even if you didn't hang out with them anymore. Chavo still owed me, even if he was dead, because he never paid his debt when he was alive. I kept my mouth shut, like the homie said. It was time to reach out to collect. Chavo's homeboys knew how to set up a rival with guns and drugs. They even did it for some unsolved murder that the cops had given up on a long time ago. They were willing to make that snitch call. That was insurance that somebody would get busted and sent away, especially if that someone was looking at 3 strikes. They did it all the time. I lit a cigarette and sat back. The problem was, that if I asked the homeboys for their help now to pay back Chavo's debt, I would end up owing them in the future, whenever they wanted, doing whatever they ordered. That's how it worked here. Who knows what they would want me to do for them? I could end up back in prison, or worse, end up dead. They might do away with my kids too if I didn't give them what they wanted. No, I didn't want to owe them anything. I didn't want to owe anybody. I was done with that. I'd paid enough already. I went back to the small bedroom, the one I shared with Laughing Girl when she was around. I leaned all my weight against the heavy oak dresser and pushed it away from the wall. Behind the dresser, I dug out a piece of the linoleum that covered the floor. The space was about a foot wide, and the shoebox that I'd put the gun in fit just fine. The shoebox was covered with plywood, and in case anybody got that far, I'd nailed the piece of linoleum back over the space. I'd carried Chavo's gun with me everywhere I'd lived so far, hiding it, just in case anybody came looking. Just a week or so ago, I figured I could finally get rid of it. So much time had passed by now, I just didn't get around to it. Under the bathroom cabinet was my rusty hammer, the one I used to nail a board over the broken part of the window in the bathroom and to hang my son's school picture over the table in the kitchen. I bent down next to the dresser and used the cloth side of the hammer to remove the nails holding the linoleum. It took me a long time, but I kept at it until I reached the shoebox. Sitting back on my heels, I lifted out the gun and turned it over in my hands. There were enough bullets in the chamber. I unlocked the safety and examined it. It was just the way it was after Chavo used it to kill that other guy and gave it to me. I felt relaxed now, and I went and sat back down on the couch. When I got locked up and started doing my time, the day they took away my baby girl, I sat there with no justice. No justice for people like us, not unless we made it ourselves. There were lots of things I couldn't do for my daughter, but I could do this right now because I wanted something better for her, even if she didn't. But maybe someday she would. It's the end.
If I would take the mute off. Well done. Thank you, Francine. Perfect time. We
Thank
finished
you.
right at 2:45. So we hope you will come and investigate Madville Publishing and read some of these wonderful authors.
It's wonderful. Thank you so much. And you know, at the happy hour tonight, if you all want to share some more, all the authors want to share some more of their stories and read some of their stories, we welcome you to join us. And readers, this is all for you. So thank you so much. We're going
Thank
to
you,
take
Pulpwood Queens. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
Kim,
Thank you.
for everything you're
so
doing.
much.
Yeah,
So
that was
much.
We love
powerful.
you. We love you. We will see you next session on the hour. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody. Love you all.
Bye.
Bye.